Good evening. This is Helen Thomas and the CDFM Study Group. I'm going to continue review of CDFM Module 3.2, the Accounting and Finance section, specifically finance portion of this competency 2. I will begin on page 3.2.5, which talks about the major functions of finance. And so the finance overview talks about entitlements, payments and disbursements, collection, and control of public funds. So those are the four major sections of finance, and we're going to look at each one. Now, the key to success of this section is not necessarily remembering all the volumes, all the section, is understanding what happens under each one of those major functions. Alrighty, so on page 326, it talks about at the bottom, it gives you the various section of that DoD Financial Management Regulation. I think this is the only DoD FMR that you're going to have to learn. So make sure you annotate that is DoD 7000.14R is the DoD FMR, because you may see it in the form of, okay, which one is the Department of Defense Financial Management Regulation 7000.12R, 13R, 14R, 15R. And you got to remember, the only one you're going to see in this study guide is DoD 7000.14R. So even if you don't remember none of the volumes, none of the sections, make sure you know that. All right, the entitling process is the first function, which is covered on the page 3.2.8. So you turn your 2018 study guide to that page. It talks about you got to have authorization. Remember, anything for us to do with government funding, we have to have the authorization to do so. Voucher preparation. So the voucher is the package, and all of those, copy of the contract, invoice, receipt, acceptance, all of those supporting documentation must be in that packet for payment. And once you package it, one person inputs, and then another person approves or certifies. And the certifying, remember, when we deal with funding, we are liable, fiduciary liability, meaning that we have to pay back that money if we make a mistake or if it found that we approved something that was incorrect. So you got to ensure that entitling process, authorization, voucher preparation, certification. Accountable individual on page 11. Who are accountable individuals to pay this money back? The departmental accountable official, whoever have that title, if you're a certifying officer, which we already talked about, or a disbursing officer, which most of us, if you served in the military in the financial management field, you've probably been a disbursing agent or even the disbursing officer who's responsible for sub-agents. So ensure that you know that piece of it. All right, improper payments on page 13. I'm not going to really go into that. What I want to go into page 15, 3 to 15. Remember, as a study guide or study session, I'm not going through each page. I'm just going through and highlighting things on that page of that section to ensure that you review that material and understand it back and forth. So on page 15, it talks about certifying military pay entitlements. There's a difference between the amount of leave that a military person earns versus a civilian. So that's kind of how you're looking at this section. So this particular one deals with the military on page 15. So leave for the military personnel is they get paid 30 days leave per fiscal year. When you say year, always think fiscal year. 1 October of one year to 30 September of the other. And so upon separation or retirement, they may sell back up to 60 days of unused leave. So read through that. And in the back of your mind, you want to know, okay, well, what are the civilians authorized to do? And we'll look at that a little bit later. For clothing, it talks about the $400 for the officers receive that one time up front. When they become officers, they get $400 for clothing. And after that, they're on their own because they make more money than the enlisted. And the enlisted gets clothing allowance annually on their anniversary of when they came into the military. So those are kind of the stuff you want to pull out of there. Page 16 talks about allotments for the military. It says you have discretionary allotment and non-discretionary. The same thing like the budget was broken down into discretionary, meaning I can do what I want with that allotment, or non-discretionary are things that I have to pay. I have to pay for my TRICARE or whatever they take out for that. So discretionary says we are limited, we military are limited to 6 discretionary allotments. If I want my car payment to come out, that's 1. If I want my house payment to come out, that's 2, and so forth. Discretionary means I get to pick what that allotment is. The civilian pay entitlements on page 17 begins on 3/2/17. It says for certification of time and attendance, we have 26 pay period. Remember, we get paid every 2 weeks, which equates to 26 pay period a year. Work hours, overtime, we don't get it unless you approve. The leave or on page, now our leave is based on how much government time we have. But for the most part, on page 18, the additional types of leave we have, Family and Friendly Leave Act says I can get up to, the employees may use up to 104 hours of sick leave, even if the employee is not sick. So we are allowed 104 hours to provide care for a family. If I have a family member that's sick, I can use my sick leave to stay with that family member. All right, some other ones, you can read through the other ones. All right, page 19 talks about records, pay records. Civilian pay records are kept, if you look on page 19, the second paragraph, establishment and control of employee pay records. It says civilian pay records are retained for 56 years. Traditional other records are kept for 6 years and 3 months. But when it comes to pay records are retained for 56 years, regardless of the status of that individual. Special pay claims, you can read through the other section. Payments of vendors, the other stuff is pretty straightforward. So if you see me kind of going through, I still advise you to read everything, but I'm not going to focus on those areas per se. Let's see, payment of vendors on page 24 talks about payments to vendors, whether it's via fast pay, pay and confirm, or constructive acceptance. All right, so Prompt Payment Act. I think you're going to have to make sure you know page 25 through 27 is making sure that you can calculate the payment due date. So like, say we accept, we order some paper, we got the paper in, but we didn't have, when is the payment due? We don't know. So we have to calculate it based on the time when you receive the item, the time when the invoice was received, then you may have to calculate the payment due date. So make sure you understand those steps as you go through. Okay, disbursement of government funds. Page 30 just gives you a list of disbursement methods. Electronic fund transfer, EFT. We can either do treasury check, large disbursement versus smaller disbursements. Those are different methods that can be used. The preferred method is the EFT, which is easier from bank to bank. We can transfer the money that way. So typically, we try not to issue checks too often because, again, checks can get lost. So you got to make sure that your account information is correct and do the EFT method. E-commerce, lockbox. A lot of this is information, debt collection. Yeah, let's talk about debt collection on page 37. So collection of debt owed by an individual. If you, let's say you lost a gear, you lost something from the government, or you owe the government, like what I see because I deal with DTS, Defense Travel System, and sometimes individuals get overpaid for some reason, the approvers don't catch it, and now you owe the debt to the government. So there are different ways in collecting that debt. Collection of a debt owed by a current military member or civilian. It talks about a DoD component member So you either can pay pay.gov directly, or you may do payroll deduction. They can take it out of your paycheck each month. Collection of a debt by a former employee. Used to work for the government, but you no longer work for the government. They'll send some debt letters, maybe retained in certain ways. Any former military member or civilian who owes monies to the DoD shall be sent a one letter. You're only required to get notification of one letter before they try to collect that money from you. And in most instances, if they keep trying, they can't get it, then they'll go to the IRS and try. When you do your taxes, they'll try to refer the money. So that's why it talks about referral to the IRS. So what you need to understand in this section is the timeline associated, referral to other federal agencies. If we figure out you work for CIA or some other agency and we need to collect that debt from you. So pay your debts. All right, pay debt collection from a vendor. If a vendor owes the government, and how does that happen? Since I deal with miscellaneous pay sometimes, you may accidentally pay the wrong vendor. And now that wrong vendor now has the money for a contract that they didn't have. So now they have to return the funding once you figure it out. So they owe the government back the money. And then there are procedures to recoup those funding. All right, and then on page 3239 goes into the fourth function of finance, control of public funds. So this kind of ties back into when we did the fiscal law, end of the fiscal law section, the flow of funds. Now we need to have control measures in place. It talks about at the bottom, pecuniary liability associated with the funds that each dispersing officer is entrusted with, and at least semi-annually, the DO shall make an inspection. You got to do, especially if you handle cash, like when we were deployed, we actually handled cash. We always had spot inspection where individual would just show up. Hey, we got to inspect your vault, your documentation to make sure everything balances out. If we're out of balance, page 40, typically we're not allowed to put money. Let's say, hey, I'm short $1. Let me take $1 out my pocket to make sure I'm balanced. So we have to ensure that the money we receive, if the cash is gone, we better have the accountable documentation to balance out. If it doesn't, then we have a discrepancy. So on page 40, it's talking about different dispersing accounts that we can have. Out of balance, it's either a minor loss or a major loss. So a minor loss is anything less than $750. It's minor. Once you start getting more than $750, that's a major loss. So it requires additional action to be able to settle that loss. Check issue overdraft. The situation occurs when the amount of the check is greater than the amount that is really owed, reported by the DO. We put the check is wrote for $100, but we wrote down $90. We got to figure out what's that discrepancy. And the same thing with the underdraft is we issue for the check for less than what we really owed. Now you got to have two checks, so it starts asking questions. So page 41, it talks about the delivery of checks, undeliverable checks. They keep trying, but up to a 60-day period, the DoD will attempt to deliver a check within 60 days. And after that, you kind of have to go searching for your money. Hey, I need my money. The Borrowing Act at the bottom of page 41 requires the government to receive a claim within 6 years from the time a claim accrues, other than for entitlements. This law applies to anyone, civilian or military. So remember, the Borrowing Act says if you have a claim on the government, for the government, for an entitlement, you have 6 years to file that claim. All right, so what are some of the dispersing documents and reporting requirements? You have daily reports that we're responsible for, monthly, and you also have the record maintenance that we talked about. So on the bottom of page 42 talks about the daily, monthly reports. You have the DD 2657, the Daily Statement of Accountability, Statement of accountability, which is a monthly report. So you have the daily accountability, and then you have a monthly accountability. So every night we got to balance. And that way, when it comes to the monthly report, we are confident that we are accountable for all the resources and funds that we receive. Another daily report is the daily agent. I have sub-agents under me as a dispersing officer, so the DD 2665 should also be balanced. Voucher log. For every voucher that is issued, the DD 2658 is then updated. Or is it 2659? I try to read without my glasses, right? And then when we make deposits, you use a deposit ticket, which is SF215. When we deal with checks, on page 43, we deal OTC net. That's the check counter channel application that we use to process checks that we receive. The deposit ticket, SF215, and checks, we use OTC net. We talked about record maintenance remember when we did the civilian payroll, 56 years, but also this section record maintenance talks about that 6 years and 3 months for keeping pay records. So that is, and actually that concludes the finance section of CDFM Module 3, Competency 2, Finance. And I'll see you guys again next time. Be sure to subscribe to the CDFM study group as I continue to review the 2018 study guides to provide you with the most up-to-date information available. Subscribe, share it with your other financial managers who are studying for the CDFM, and hopefully my review will help you to better understand the information so that you too can be successful to earn your CDFM certification. Thank you, and I'll see you guys again next time.